Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the State of CPJ, an annual review of the Center for Public Justice. I'm Dawn Brotherton, the new Director of Development for CPJ. I'm joining today from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where I live and work with my husband and 3 children. For the past 20 years, I've worked with nonprofits, schools, and faith-based organizations to help them fulfill their mission. I came to CPJ last fall, and I'm happy to be here strengthening support for the Center for Public Justice. I appreciate you taking time today to join us, and if we have not yet met, I look forward to talking with you sometime soon. Please share in your chat, if you haven't already done so, your name, where you're joining from today, and if applicable, the organization that you represent. During this webinar, you will hear highlights about CPJ's year and learn about our plans for the future. Stephanie Summers, our CEO, will provide the State of CPJ review. And following her remarks, 2 special guests will give you a picture of some of the great things happening because of your support. First, we'll hear from Stanley Carlson-Thies, founder and director of the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, also known as IRFA, a program of the Center for Public Justice. And then we'll hear from Ms. Chandler Robinson, advocacy intern with both CPJ and APJ, the Association for Public Justice. APJ is a network of communities nationwide pursuing justice through collective and prayerful advocacy and action plans to address justice and injustice at all levels of government. So we'll hear from them in a few minutes. Before we go any further, I want to thank some very special people who are here with us this evening. The reason that CPJ is able to continue moving forward with our mission is because of the many people who give financially and also with their time and knowledge to support this work. Your generosity, encouragement, and advocacy advance justice. You are truly our partners in this work, and CPJ would not exist without you. Your concern for your neighbors and your actions to promote the flourishing of all people makes a difference. So thank you for caring and taking action. Every program you will hear about today happens in part thanks to you. We cannot say enough how much we appreciate your support of CPJ and IRFA. So thank you so much. If you have not yet seen our annual report, a link to a digital version will be included in the email you'll receive from us after the webinar. Some of you will have received it in the mail already, and hopefully you've had a chance to glance through it. After our speakers, we will move to your questions. When you have them, please use the Q&A feature. Look for the Q&A button on the bottom bar at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Though we might not have time for all of them, we'll do our best to cover as many as possible. The chat feature will be turned off, so please use the Q&A button instead. You can ask your questions anonymously if you want. You don't have to have your name shared with others, so know that's possible. Thanks again for joining us and for your interest in CPJ. Let me introduce Stephanie before I turn things over to her. Stephanie Summers is the CEO of the Center for Public Justice. Stephanie is a co-author with the late Washington Post columnist Michael J. Gerson and Katie Thompson of the book Unleashing Opportunity: Why Escaping Poverty Requires a Shared Vision of Justice. She is also a frequent speaker and moderator of recent topics, which include Christian activism in Reformed Public Theology and leadership in the Routledge Handbook of Religious Literacy, Pluralism, and Global Engagement. Ms. Summers is a recipient of the inaugural Duke Divinity Reflective Leadership Award. She also received her MS in Nonprofit Management from Eastern University. Prior to her appointment at the Center for Public Justice, Stephanie spent 12 years with the CCO, where her roles included Vice President for the Eastern Region and Vice President for Organizational Development. Ms. Summers began her career in nonprofit administration as Executive Director of the Open Door, a church-based youth center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Stephanie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dawn. And I just want to add my welcome to all of you who are joining us today for what we fondly refer to as the state of CPJ. I'm super grateful, and it's just really fun to see everyone's name in the chat and all the places you're zooming in from. So thanks for joining us. We're really grateful to God that CPJ has entered our 46th year of service as an organization, fulfilling our mission, which you see on the screen there, equipping citizens, developing leaders, shaping policy to serve God, advance justice, and transform public life. And I'm glad to be able to say today that the state of CPJ is strong. And I want to share a few highlights with you before we bring in some guests to share in a little bit greater detail. On equipping citizens, within our shared justice program for young adults, we're now in our 6th year of awarding the Hatfield Prize. This is a prize we award to student faculty teams studying policy issues in their local communities. And we're really grateful for the opportunity that we have had to do that. We also began offering paid internships about 3 years ago now, and the Lord has continued to provide the resources for interns to join our team for a really formative experience, including our Public Justice 101 class. And you'll get to hear from Chandler Robinson a little bit later to talk about her internship experience with us. And our Families Valued team continues to gather advocates for family supportive workplace and public policies, which have become ever more important in light of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, as pregnant women and families need additional support now more than ever. On the front of developing leaders, our Equipping Ministries Fellowship, which is our cohort-based program for Hispanic-led faith-based organizations in partnership with the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference and the Texas Baptists, is in its 2nd year. I'm actually just back from San Antonio, where our fellows are working on completing their community-based projects. We'll be launching an Equipping Ministries Fellowship podcast later this spring to feature this work in some detail. And we're on track to begin a 2nd cohort in Texas in 2024. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve these leaders and excited to share more with you about them in the coming year. Another exciting development actually launches tomorrow. You'll see on your screen this logo for Civitas. Civitas is a cohort-based program for young adults who are serving on Capitol Hill. This experience is a 10-session intensive leadership development experience designed to introduce CPJ's perspective for Christian public service and public justice in our pluralistic society. So I'd even just invite your prayers for the cohort that launches tomorrow. We're really excited about what's happening with it. And on the front of shaping policy, CPJ's Families Valued team continues to lead with public policy proposals for pro-life family supportive policies, including a common ground proposal for paid family leave. We were delighted at year end that the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act, which offers protections for all pregnant women, was enacted. And we helped ensure that the PWFA contained important religious freedom protections for employers, as highlighted in a recent webinar, which we're sharing with you in the chat right now. In addition, I'd like to just highlight another body of work. We're doing landscape research on faith-based child care, including a current 2-state study in collaboration with Baylor University's Institute for Studies of Religion, where we're mapping the prevalence and features of faith-based child care, in this case in Georgia and Massachusetts, adding to the Michigan study that we released this past fall. These studies help inform policymakers as they make crucial decisions about child care policy and help them understand the landscape in the states and the role that faith-based providers play. And to that end, you'll actually hear in a little bit more from our colleague, Stanley Carlson-Thies, whose work leading CPJ's Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance is essential to CPJ's work of shaping policy. So if you've been around CPJ for any period of time, you might be wondering, how are they doing all of this? Thanks to you and thanks be to God. We're really grateful. And this past fall, we grew significantly on 3 fronts. So I want to share with you about those 3 things now. First, we grew in terms of our team. The slide on the screen shows a photo of our team from this fall. We have a talented team to support our growing work, including a terrific board of trustees. And we're grateful for the service of these men and women from all around the country and the leadership that they provide as true stewards for the organization's mission. Second, we had incredible growth as a result of a capacity building investment from the MJ Murdoch Charitable Trust. CPJ was able to bring on a talented fund development team. And so you met Don earlier already. And one thing that we've been delighted to already have be fruit of that work is receiving a $500,000 gift match towards new gifts to our endowment. And we're excited about how this is going to help to ensure faithful work for future generations. And lastly, we've grown in the impact and participation in our programs because we've moved to a hybrid model for our programs, so both online and in-person formats. You may have noticed already our new website, which was just phase 1. And we'll just invite you to stay tuned for phase 2, which will roll out and will host CPJ's resource library. This is the treasure trove of resources you have relied on us for the past 46 years that will be made available digitally in the future coming months. So you're such an encouragement to us, affirming again and again the unique contributions that we can make in the world together. And one of these key contributions is CPJ's particular understanding of institutional religious freedom in a society of many diverse beliefs. So I'd like to bring into our conversation my colleague, Stanley Carlson-Thies, who leads the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, also known as IRFA, which is a part of the Center for Public Justice. I'm just going to table set a little bit. IRFA's unique contribution in the world is to help proactively shape the public policy environment for faith-based organizations of all faiths, allowing them to continue to make their distinctive contributions to common life. IRFA doesn't do legal defense, although I want to take the time to just affirm the importance that legal defense plays for faith-based organizations when they end up in court regarding challenges to their institutional religious freedom. However, IRFA is unique in its singular focus, which is shaping the public policy environment, everything upstream from court, so that faith-based organizations of all faiths are free to serve in our diverse society. So now let me turn to Stanley. I'm going to introduce him. Stanley Carlson-Thies is the founder and senior director of the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, a program of the Center for Public Justice. And as part of his role, he convenes the Coalition to Preserve Religious Freedom, which is a multi-faith alliance of social service, education, and religious freedom organizations that advocates for the religious freedom of faith-based organizations to Congress and the federal government. Previously, he was the director of social policy studies for CPJ. He also directed CPJ's project to track the implementation and impact of the charitable choice provision of the 1996 federal welfare reform law. He served the White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives from its inception in February 2001 until mid-May of 2002. And following the term in the White House and before starting the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, Stanley served as CPJ's Director of Faith-Based Policy Studies. He has a long history with the organization, and I'm excited to be able to share a couple things with you about his work. So Stanley, welcome. Let's dive in here. I got a couple questions for you. I know that many folks are helped by understanding the context. So could we start with you sharing about what the Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance is and why it's important?
All right. Thanks, Stephanie. Seeing that introduction, I feel pretty ancient. So So IRFA, Institutional Religious Freedom Alliance, I just want to start by saying it is institutional and not international. Sometimes people get that mixed up. I wanted to put institutional in front just to emphasize that it's not just individuals who have religious freedom needs, but also religious organizations. Religious freedom protections are always important when an organization or a person needs to do something or stop doing something because that's what God says, even though the law says something else. And we know that with persons, like the worker who needs to have Sunday off and the boss says, no, you got to come in. But also organizations, gospel rescue missions, faith-based childcare, CPJ, sometimes businesses, they need religious freedom protections so that they can be faithful to what they think God calls them to do. In the CPJ Neo-Kuyperian tradition, we recognize that civil society organizations are really important. So besides families, think tanks, rescue missions, and all the rest. But for them to be able to flourish, if they're faith-based, they need to have the room to do what God calls them to do. So IRFA is watching that religious freedom part of the civil society organizations that are so important for us. We work on a nonpartisan basis, have to work across the aisle because religious freedom is important to whoever's in office. We work with multiple faiths and denominations and across different kinds of services. So not just schools, for example, not just adoption agencies, but all the different kinds of faith-based organizations that need to have religious freedom protections. And as you said, Stephanie, we work upstream of the courts. We're glad people are in the courts to defend organizations when they need it, but better to have laws and regulations be appropriately designed beforehand. I'd say we do kind of three levels of work, three types of work. One is advocating to and educating government officials, so Congress and the federal administration, occasionally state officials, about how laws and programs ought to be shaped so that they will appropriately protect religious freedom. So that's one part of it, the government part. Another line of action is to equip faith-based organizations themselves. So it's one thing to have appropriate laws, but if organizations don't know what they are, they don't take the right steps, then they actually can't enjoy that protection. So helping faith-based organizations understand laws and programs that affect them, how they can protect themselves by having the appropriate policies, but also encouraging them to speak up when lawmakers are going to make changes, or regulators to invite them onto comments and letters and so on. And then the third area of action is to educate public opinion and scholarship. So I talk to reporters, especially on background, to give the broader context, and then speaking and writing to legal and scholarly audiences. So we try to be a catalyst and convener, helping other organizations do better advocacy and lobbying. We gather people together, lawyers, executives, government relations specialists, to think about the important trends and then to develop strategies to protect institutional religious freedom in our changing environment. Another way to think about it is kind of a brain trust or a skunk works or a think tank within a think tank to look at that particular piece, which is the religious freedom piece, to look ahead, to assess trends, look for constructive responses, creative responses that are more than just being defensive and reactive. And just one brief thing on that childcare research. So we're doing that kind of landscape, but also we are blessed to have a research intern that's looking in one state at how well the government does in conveying to churches and other organizations that they are free to offer childcare that reflects their religious values. So if that news is not out there, then they don't know that they are able to come to the table. So we're trying to assess how that is.
Great, thank you, Stanley. Could you talk a little bit more with us about what IRFA looks like? Like if we were going to follow you around and have the IRFA experience, what would people experience?
Well, you could sit with these books, go to a bunch of meetings, talk to people on the phone and text and all that. Occasionally go to resorts to work through legislative proposals. That's pretty rare. A big thing we do, you mentioned it, I think, Stephanie, was the Coalition to Preserve Religious Freedom. So that's a monthly a meeting that gathers together religious freedom lawyers, faith-based organization executives, government relations experts, representatives of faith-based associations. I started CPRF in 2002. I left CPJ and went to the brand new White House Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives under President George W. Bush. And he was quite the advocate for faith-based organizations and clearing up federal rules and programs to create a level playing field for faith-based organizations and government funding. But it was pretty clear looking at things from the inside that no matter how enthusiastic a president is and members of his government, it really takes outside advocacy to point out problems, to encourage the government to do better, to bring specific issues to their attention. So almost as soon as I came back to CPJ after working for the federal government 2001, 2002, I looked around and I just didn't see the kind of organization that seemed to me to be really needed. There were associations for specific kinds of services and for denominations, but no one really watching the common denominator, things that are important to everybody, but they're not the specific thing that they have to especially look out for. And so they sometimes got neglected. That's things like the strings that come with government funding, inappropriate strings, religious hiring would be another one, sometimes licensing and accreditation requirements and so on. So monthly since about 2002, so that's 21 years, we've had a gathering. Sometimes many of the same organizations, sometimes newer ones, different ones come, sometimes interns come to learn, to think together about what's happening at the federal level, to think about what needs to be said, how can we collaborate, can we take action together, encourage each other to take action, and so on. IRFA itself kind of grew out of those meetings and became a separate organization and now part of CPJ. A big part of our work with IRFA and CPRF, as I said, is a faith-based initiative. That's a federal effort to create this level playing field, equal opportunity for churches and other faith-based organizations to seek government funding, partner with government to help people in need. In a way, I've worked on that ever since I joined CPJ first in October 1992. So I have a pretty extensive reputation. Thank God it's a good one. A lot of people I've worked with over time on, both parties, multiple administrations. So I did help create President Bush's White House faith-based office, and then kind of to my surprise, I think CPJ's surprise, was asked by the Obama administration to be an expert as they kind of thought through these issues themselves. On an unofficial basis, I assisted the Trump administration's faith-based initiative, and I've offered support and critique to the Biden one. So that's a lot of different administrations, but there's constant issues that are really important, and to help them see that, to be both a critical and encouraging voice to them. I also work with state officials who seek to develop good partnerships. So right now, along with Ben Odell, who's a friend of CPJ, an official in the Department of Health and Human Services Faith-Based Center, we've started a quarterly information and sharing, let's call it that, information and sharing Zoom meeting series for state and county and city officials who have this task of connecting with faith-based and community organizations. So that's something that we have just started, and we're going to see how that goes. Our guide is CPJ's principle of pluralism. So that means, honoring government and its indispensable role, but also faith-based organizations and other community organizations and what they do. And we seek for sustainable policy, something that's going to last between different administrations and not just for a particular one. So among other things, that means not only being multi-faith, but also kind of thinking about the other rights that may come to bear on the issues of faith. So other civil rights and so on. And for that reason, starting in 2015, CPJ and IRFA have worked with other religious organizations and with a range of gay rights groups to develop a new federal civil rights law that would protect both LGBTQ people, but also religious organizations, kind of both at the same time. That's called a Fairness for All effort. We're going to work at again this year. There are a lot of good opportunities to work with different kind of audiences. And among other things, I talked about talking with scholarly audiences. Last year, I was invited to write about our perspective on religious freedom and LGBTQ rights. So that kind of fairness for all idea for the Human Rights magazine of the American Bar Association. So that was quite an honor. Try to get the CPJ message out there as far as we can out in the public square.
That's great. Thanks, Stanley. Thank you as well for bringing up fairness for all. Because of that work, which for those of you who have been around a while, you know we've been working on that Fairness for All project for nearly 7 years now. We were, with our partners, able to help achieve a major expansion for protections regarding institutional religious freedom at the very end of 2022. Could you talk a little bit more about the work on the Respect for Marriage Act?
Yeah. Respect for Marriage Act, a new federal law signed by President Biden last December, that would require every state government to accept same-sex marriages that are legal in a state where they are entered into. Of course, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that same-sex marriage is constitutional and required all across the United States. But when the Supreme Court overturned the Roe versus Wade, Justice Thomas said, we might look at some other decisions that have some of the same basis. That could include same-sex marriage. And the members of Congress said, we better step in then and do something legislatively just in case the court decides to do that. I think that the Supreme Court stepping in on same-sex marriage, that seems totally unlikely. But there was this desire to pass a law. So the House passed a law. It had no religious freedom protections. It was just same-sex marriage. But senators, they looked at that and said, Senate equally divided, and then the need for 60 votes. Senators said, we're not going to do what the House did. We need to protect people who believe in traditional marriage as well. That means putting religious freedom language into a bill if we're going to put same-sex marriage into federal law. So CPJ, IRFA, with our allies that have worked in Fairness for All, we worked with senators, Republican and Democrat, to craft language that could go into that Respect for Marriage Act. And it's that bill that had religious freedom in it, as well as the same-sex marriage, that is what passed the Senate. Then it went back to the House, got passed by the House, and then was signed by President Biden. So that means that we have now a bill signed by many Republicans, all the Democrats in the Congress, and by President Biden, saying that when same-sex marriage is protected, also religious freedom has to be protected. That's to say, people who believe in biblical marriage. That language doesn't protect every kind of position that morally conservative people have. So, for example, it says nothing about transgender rights and things like that. And that's because the bill was just about same-sex marriage, about marriage law. You can't just put in every kind of protection that might be of interest in some other way in a bill like that. But all the religious freedom protections in there are very strong. For example, no house of worship, but also no, say, Christian college or K through 12 school that's religious would have to rent out its facilities for a same-sex marriage or take part in celebrating such a marriage. Faith-based organizations can't lose their tax-exempt status or government grant because they have a biblical view about marriage and don't agree with same-sex marriage. Those are pretty important protections, I think. Unfortunately, the news media covering the Respect for Marriage Act, they just have talked about the same-sex protections and not about the religious freedom parts. That's unfortunate, I think, because it's a both-and bill. But also some of our allies, religious freedom advocates and organizations, they wanted to have a broader set of protections in there. And I think they've now said what's in there is really not that important. It's not as broad as they would have liked it. So we need to pass Fairness for All, I think. But in the meantime, we have a very strong set of protections in the Respect for Marriage Act. I think that faith-based organizations, churches, shouldn't fear what just happened. They should be glad. There are new protections that didn't exist after the court made a constitutional requirement of same-sex marriage everywhere. We now have real protections. So to kind of explain that, and I hope these end up in the chat, CPJ, we did a webinar on all of this. We produced a FAQ, or an explainer, for churches and faith-based organizations. That's available, by the way, in Spanish as well as English. And 4 top church state lawyers just published, I think this week, extensive analysis of the Respect for Marriage Act and what the religious freedom protections are that are in there, why they're so important. And they point out that this is the first major federal religious freedom legal protection passed since in 1993, it was the Religious Freedom Protection Act, and then in the year 2000, another Religious Freedom Protection Act for people in jail and against zoning decisions. So this is a really significant thing that happened in Congress in December.
Thanks, Stanley. Thanks for pointing out the resources. They were in the chat, and we're going to make sure too, for folks, if everything that's coming at you in the chat is coming too fast and furious, all of this stuff will come in a follow-up email to you as well. Stanley, thank you. We're going to bring you back during the Q&A because I'm sure there'll be people with questions. I'd like to swap over to Chandler Robinson. Chandler is one of our interns, and we just love to give you a chance to hear from her. Chandler is the advocacy intern with CPJ, as well as with the Association for Public Justice, as Dawn mentioned. Chandler's an undergraduate student at Howard University. She's studying health management and Afro-American studies, and she is particularly passionate about healthcare equity and juvenile justice. Chandler is part of an on-campus organization called the Youth Justice Advocates, which works to disrupt the school-to-prison pipeline through mentorship at a local youth detention center. Chandler loves to serve, and she actively seeks out opportunities to engage with the community, whether it be on her own or another in need of love, support, and prayer. Chandler, welcome. We're really glad you're here to join us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Chandler, you are an excellent student. You could have chosen different internships, but you were searching for one and you found us online. What drew you to CPJ, and what have you learned through working here?
Well, Stephanie, I recently, within the past year and a half, discovered that I had a passion for advocacy, particularly in healthcare equity. And I felt that I had gained some knowledge about the ins and outs of the healthcare system through my studies at my university. However, I found that I knew little to nothing about advocacy. So I was excited to see that the Center for Public Justice is not only an organization whose advocacy work addresses so many forms of injustice, but that it is also a Christian organization where I can live out my passions with other individuals who are being led by Christ. And after starting my internship and seeing so much of the work of CPJ connecting with so many other aspects of my life, whether it be my school life or my personal life, I just knew that CPJ was the exact place where God wanted me to be.
Good, that's how we felt about you. Could you tell us what the most enjoyable part of your internship has been so far?
Definitely. The most enjoyable part of my internship so far, I'll say, has definitely been the Families Valued events. Working under Maddie Allen, the advocacy manager, I do have the opportunity of seeing a little behind the scenes when it comes to planning. However, seeing the events come together is so powerful. I'm just always so blessed by every webinar. And I know that if I gain so much from the events, having seen snippets of the planning, I can only imagine how the audience feels after watching. So I'm so grateful that not only the Families Value team, but the entire staff at CPJ has allowed me to engage so deeply in its work. CPJ has not just been an organization that throws busy work at the interns, but truly enthralls us in the faithful work the organization does.
We tell interns when they interview that they will have a real work educational experience. They will not be watering rubber plants, and we're not lying. So can you tell the folks who are with us today something you've learned from CPJ that you'll take with you into the future?
Yes, one thing I've learned is as pursuers of justice, our work is, of course, never complete. And it's so important in this work to understand that the tangible process is not always easily seen. So CPJ has taught me to be patient and just trust God's timing, and that He will guide us to little victories, which will ultimately be big victories for his kingdom. So, with patience, CPJ has also allowed me to stay hopeful. It can be so hard to remain optimistic in the world that we live in, but by reaffirming our Father has already won, CPJ has encouraged me to look toward a more hopeful future, which is something I will definitely carry out following my time here.
Thanks. That's great. Chandler, you moved from working with CPJ for a semester to now working with our 501c4, the Association for Public Justice. The Association for Public Justice does a little bit more focused work equipping citizens to do direct advocacy work. For example, organizing groups to meet with their legislators to talk about family supportive policies. I'm sure you could share a lot on this question, but due to time, I'm going to ask you to share briefly. Could you tell us one thing that you're working on now and what encourages you in that work?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on social media and newsletter communications for the Association for Public Justice. I was very nervous to be taking on these tasks as I've never really worked on social media strategy or email marketing, but I've definitely been so encouraged by the amount of support I've received from Michelle Kirtley, who I work under at APJ, and also from the CPJ communications team, who has been very helpful in answering any questions that I have.
Awesome. Thanks, Chandler. Stick around because we're going to bring everybody back and we're going to do some Q&A with some questions. So if Stanley and Dawn want to join us again, we're going to turn to your questions. There's several in the chat, or in the Q&A thing. So I'm going to do a little bit of work on these for us here. First question for Stanley. Stanley, would you be able to share with us some recent examples of how the religious freedom language in the Respect for Marriage Act has already been referred to for either case decisions or used to help faith-based organizations protect their faith identity?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's a very new, right? So December. We're really happy for that law review article to be out so quickly to kind of walk people through the whole explanation. Almost immediately after it was adopted, it actually was useful in a then current case, which had to do with Christian colleges and universities who had been charged with wrongly discriminating against LGBTQ students. And so some of them had taken actually the Department of Education to court for the Department of Education respecting the exemption that is there for religious colleges and universities. Isn't that kind of odd? The law says there's exemption for religious colleges and universities. These religious colleges and universities use that exemption to allow them to have a policy about same-sex marriage, about the sexuality that they believe God calls them to and that the law permits. And so a number of aggrieved students and alumni of some colleges then sued the Department of Education to say, you can't do that. Take away the exemption, take away their federal funding. As that case was kind of looked like it was going to go to trial, the lawyer for those Christian colleges and universities sent kind of a supplemental memo to the judge, just saying, we've had all these briefings, we've had all this evidence, various arguments about whether the suit should go forward or not. And here's something that's just happened. That's to say, President Biden, and along with all the Democrats in Congress and many Republicans, have adopted this law about same-sex marriage and religious freedom that says if we're going to have same-sex marriage by statute, we also have to have religious freedom. You have to balance these things together. In other words, Congress is saying it's not terrible, it's not wrong for people to have a different view about marriage, but in fact that ought to be protected. That gives you, judge, a background for how you might rule on what's right before you. And so, kind of, let's call it miraculously, instead of that case actually going to trial, the judge just said, I get it. The exemptions there in the law, these organizations have the right to it. And so we're not even going to have to go to trial on this. That was a pretty significant turnaround. And impossible to say it was because of that memo, impossible to say it was because of Respect for Marriage Act, but highly significant the way it came, all the momentum going one direction and then backing up totally in the other way. We're really hopeful that this kind of reopening of eyes occurs in other places. You know, up until fairly recently, it was very common for people to think about whether same-sex marriage or non-discrimination laws based on sexual orientation, gender identity, always to have religious freedom language in those laws. So before the court ever stepped in to require same-sex marriage, a number of states had done so, including my state of Maryland. All the states that passed same-sex marriage themselves put in religious freedom protections. These are very blue states: Hawaii, New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and others. They all did that. They said we have to protect both sets of rights. Now Congress has stepped in and said exactly the same thing. I think that's going to be pretty significant going forward.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Hey, another question, and I'm going to go ahead and take this one, and then I'm going to come to Chandler with the next one. The question was, has the Civitas cohort, which we're launching tomorrow with young adults on Capitol Hill, been able to be compromised of a balance of different parties, staffers, and what types of positions do they represent? Great question. Thank you. It has been. One of the things that's been really encouraging is the ability that we've had to be able to draw in folks from different parties and by design as part of the cohort. One of the things that we've learned in our interactions over the last several years on the Hill, as things have gotten sort of increasingly polarized, is that people from different parties, unless they work on a committee, they literally never speak to someone from the other side. And so we've had the opportunity to invite people into this experience with them knowing that part of the work that they'll actually do is be with people who are from a different party. So we're grateful for that. And then, and it also, has been a gift to be able to be referred to and have kind of discover just kind of the sets of relationships with Christians throughout the different parties on the Hill. And then to the second part of the question, what types of positions do they represent? These are folks who are coming in at the very entry level position. So they're not interns, they've actually got a position, but they're beginning their Capitol Hill careers. What we've found is that there are lots of opportunities that teach and educate folks who are a little bit more advanced in their careers, and very little available for these folks at the very beginning. And we've also found that the folks at the very beginning with talents for public service advance very quickly into those more senior roles. And, if you are a person who really, wants to dig into the data, you can actually look at this online and see sometimes it's like 90 days someone's in a position and then suddenly they're in charge of something really important. And so we really wanted to take the opportunity right when folks were getting started to help kind of have the conversations that we think help kind of back things away from maybe the partisan, kind of like scrum on the dance floor, spend a little bit more time on the balcony to try to take some perspective that then can help shape the work that they're doing. And I want to just share, there's another person who asked a question, sort of in kind of the hyper-partisan and soundbite only environment of DC, it's hard to explain organizations like CPJ because we don't fit into kind of the left-right binary. So how do we succinctly describe it? I often use that dance floor and balcony analogy in order to help people say, we're stepping back as Christians and looking at the call of who we are as people in public service, either citizens or actually serving vocationally in public service, and thinking about it from that perspective first, and then doing that work with that lens. So that can be a helpful way as you're trying to share with others. Chandler, I want to loop back to you while we still have a minute, and then I'm going to come to Dawn. Chandler, you mentioned, that involvement in the Families Valued events as a highlight of your time with us and how rewarding those have been. And I know that those events happen quarterly and that anyone can join those events. Could you share a little bit more about the theme of those events and what policy issues are being addressed in those events and kind of what stands out for you from how the panelists have talked about the work?
Yeah, since I've started, I'll say the themes have ranged from of course, family supportive policy as a whole, but supporting mothers, particularly Black mothers. Right now, there is a series entitled Setting a Table Where Families Flourish. And there was just an event a few weeks ago entitled Living Life Abundantly with speaker Kendall Vanderslice. And it just is a series and text study around how families can come together, how we can meet each other and support each other's needs. So one thing that particularly stuck out to me from Kendall Vanderslice was her mentioning of the dinner church where they come together and eat dinner together at a large table and kind of come around, and you don't realize everyone doesn't realize coming in how something as small as maybe someone doesn't have children at home and there's children at the dinner church and they get to experience time with children and meet that need. So it's so important for us to come together because we don't always realize exactly what we need, but of course the Lord always has us where we need to be when we need to be there, and He can meet us there and fulfill those needs.
Thanks. That's great, Chandler. And I think helpful, Stanley mentioned earlier kind of the breadth of the work we're doing with civil society institutions, right? Families Valued work has this whole public policy dimension to it about promoting and protecting the well-being of families. And it also has this whole dimension to it about how do we actually come to understand who families are and the role that they play in society. What are we trying to protect and care for? So thank you. Dawn, I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to start by saying there's a compliment for you that came in as a question. And the compliment said, congratulations on publishing a most informative and impressive annual report. So thank you to our communications team who is not on screen right now running this webinar, but also thank you, Dawn, for your work there. I would love to just have you maybe answer two questions that have been asked. Sort of one question is, as you're looking forward, where are you looking for future sources of support for CPJ as we want to keep growing? And you also mentioned that we have a gift match towards an endowment. So could you tell us a little bit more about the endowment, purpose, and how people could get involved?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. It was really fun to receive that in the mail myself and hold it for the first time after working on it with our team for so long. So I'm glad that people out there are reading it. The endowment is a very exciting and wonderful gift and a great opportunity for CPJ. I think it's one of the things I'm most excited about in coming on board in the fall. A generous donor has given our organization a $500,000 gift to launch a $1 million endowment. So there's a 5-year time frame on that, and this means that until 2027, gifts will be matched dollar for dollar up to $500,000. And once we reach $1 million, we will be able to use proceeds from the endowment to fund our budget under the general fund. However, it also means that we could lose out on the funds if we don't secure the rest of the startup money for this initiative. So this is a great challenge. As the Public Justice Endowment Fund, that's what we're calling it, the Public Justice Endowment Fund grows, its funds will sustain our organization long into the future. So as you know, lots of people like to invest in endowments because it does do that. It's there for perpetuity, and then the money that grows from it can be used to support the organization. So the fund's core will remain intact and grow, but the investment income will also create a self-sustaining income stream for us. This helps to relieve the immediate fundraising pressure that's kind of always there. Plus, it will enhance our organizational stability during economic downturns, because you know that there's always this piece that's a stable foundation that's there. So when you give into the endowment, you are basically making investment into the future, and kind of like a double 2-for-1 deal, because if you make an annual gift into the endowment fund, it's also paying out money over time in the future, but it's also this match. So it's a 2-for-1 deal there too. So, if you're into deals, this is like the best thing ever. So this initiative to launch the Public Justice Endowment fund reflects our leadership's long-term planning and fiscal responsibility as well. So that's pretty exciting. It's always been true of CPJ, and it remains true now of our trustees. And we envision a future with many open doors for program expansion and to be able to go wherever God leads us as far as programs and things go. So it's an opportunity that is very exciting. The endowment fund is going to be managed. It is being managed by the Barnabas Foundation, and all donors to CPJ are eligible to receive free estate planning services with the Barnabas Foundation to help you work out those plans and goals. So that's a really great benefit of this as well. If you are interested in something like that, we'll get in touch and set you up with a meeting with very experienced folks at Barnabas Foundation. Gifts of all sizes are needed to make an impact. We'll have people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars maybe, and people who make hundreds of dollars. And it all matters. All of it goes into that endowment, and all of it will grow together. So just remember that all your gifts will be matched, and that's also beneficial. Also, we encourage non-cash gifts such as personal property, appreciated stocks, retirement funds, life insurance policies. Business interests can be donated through planned giving. So there's lots of different ways to do planned gifts, and we can help you learn about what those are. As qualified participants can also give from their IRA or an employee match program. So that would be a double match there. Finally, pledges are also accepted. Pledges can be made and fulfilled within 10 years, and pledges towards a planned gift can be made by people who are 70 years or older at their passing. So it's all very exciting, and there's lots of opportunity here for you to be involved. Yeah, again, we're really incredibly grateful for God's provision in this way. It's not something that we could have really seen or planned for, but here it is, and we're super excited for you to be involved. So you will be hearing much more from us about this initiative, as well as how to participate in planned giving or make a pledge. So stay tuned. I hope you're excited to be involved. I think another part of that question was, where are other areas you're looking to gain support? And there's always people who don't know about CPJ. So there's the people who do and have been supporting us for a long time, and we're so thankful that they give. And then there's people who have sort of been hearing about us for a while, but maybe they haven't quite decided to make a gift yet. So that's another group of people we would love to encourage to participate. And then there's folks who don't know anything about CPJ. So we're trying to be strategic and find new ways to talk about CPJ, tell stories of the folks who are impacted by the work we do, so that other people can understand and be involved as well.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Hey, I'm just going to take one last question, and I'm going to turn it back to Dawn to wrap us up, actually. So one more question was just, and I'm sorry, I should say there are, like we said at the outset, there's more questions than we have time, but hopefully I managed to capture most of them in the questions that we asked. One question that was asked that I do want to make sure to get to is sort of how will current events or cultural shifts shape CPJ and our future work? And I want to give a brief answer to this. CPJ actually next week begins work with a strategic planning team, which contains members of our staff, members of our board, and outside advisors in a process of strategic planning that has, I think, a really exciting discernment component to it that actually involves feedback from people as we share it over time. So it won't be the first time you hear about this strategic plan, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to be able to do that work and be able to report back on what we've learned from folks who have been involved and folks we're just getting to know. So thanks for that question. Okay, Dawn, can you wrap us up?
Yes, thank you everyone for the great questions and your interest in what's happening here at CPJ. We're grateful for you and appreciate the support you give in many different ways. We would ask that you continue to pray for our CPJ team, for our interns, for our advocacy efforts, and our partners in the work we all do together. A couple announcements before Stephanie closes our time in prayer. For those of you who have joined us today who are not yet part of our team, please consider partnering with us through a gift of financial support this year. You can make your donation securely through the donate button on our website. While you're there, you can sign up to receive newsletters and hear about upcoming webinars and events, such as the ones you heard about tonight. The website is full of resources and information, so check it out. You'll find everything at www.cpjustice.org. Also, and finally, mark your calendars for May 3rd to 4th. This is our very exciting 24-hour CPJ Giving Day. It is a very fun time to celebrate CPJ and the work we do and to talk about it with your friends. So keep an eye on your email and social media for more details about that coming up soon. And then keep an eye on your email to follow up this program with all of the links and resources to everything that was mentioned here today. So Stephanie, back to you.
All right, I am going to close our time in prayer, and I would also just invite you as we end this evening, if you'd be willing to pray for us as well. We know that it's actually one of the things we talk about in almost every meeting that we have, which is, you know, okay, Lord, we're seeking your wisdom. We're relying on you. We know that this is, you know, ways that you're going to surprise us. And we just pray with great thanksgiving that God continues to provide for CPJ, continues to equip us, continues to open doors of opportunity. But we really value your prayers, and we're grateful for those of you who pray for us and have communicated that to us. We're just really thankful for that. So let's close our time together in prayer. Well, Father God, we're grateful to celebrate your tremendous faithfulness. Thank you. Thank you for the way that you have seen fit to use this organization for 46 years. Thank you for the way that you have used it to bear fruit throughout your world. Lord, thank you for the folks who have joined today in the live session, for the great questions, for the ways that they are reflective of the intellect that you have blessed your people with. And Lord, I pray that everyone who was here would be recipients of your love and care, that they would be strengthened and encouraged by this time in a season where religion or politics feels like words even that seem divisive by their very nature. Lord, we pray that the time that we've spent a little bit outside of what feels like the fray can be a healing balm and a blessing. And so, Lord, would you strengthen each of us in our service to you, whether it's as citizens or as public servants? Would you help us to follow you in faithfulness? Would you help us to trust you, to be people who are patient and formed by you, who seek to bring peace? And Lord, would you continue to use every person on this call in your service and be pleased with the work that's being done. Father, too, we're grateful that you are trustworthy, and we are grateful for the way that you have continued in tremendous faithfulness towards your ends in the world. And so we trust you and we love you. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thanks everyone for being here with us today. We're really grateful. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward to talking again.